The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus stood at attention beside the grand entrance. His uniform was immaculate, brass buttons gleaming, boots polished to a mirror shine. He had been a palace sentinel for 3 years now, and he took pride in his work. Every morning he arrived before dawn to take his position, and every evening he was the last to leave. The job meant everything to him. Marcus came from a small village on the outskirts of the kingdom. His father had been a blacksmith, his mother a seamstress. They had worked hard to give him a good life, and when the palace announced they were recruiting new guards, Marcus saw it as his chance to make something of himself. He trained for months, pushing his body to its limits, learning combat techniques and palace protocols. When he finally earned his position, his parents wept with joy. The palace was a magnificent structure with towering spires and marble columns. Inside, the royal family lived in luxury that Marcus could barely imagine. He had seen Prince George from a distance several times. The young prince was known for his kindness and his interest in the welfare of palace staff. Unlike some royals who treated servants as invisible, Prince George would nod and smile at the guards as he passed. This small gesture meant more to the guards than he probably realized. On this particular morning, Marcus noticed unusual activity near the training grounds. A group of new recruits had arrived the day before, young men eager to prove themselves worthy of serving the palace. Marcus remembered his own early days, the nervousness and excitement mixed together. He had been just like them once, desperate to belong and willing to work harder than anyone else. As the morning progressed, Marcus maintained his position with the discipline he had perfected over the years. His eyes scanned the courtyard constantly, watching for anything unusual. Palace security was no joke. There had been threats in the past, and every guard understood the weight of their responsibility. They were not just standing around looking impressive in their uniforms. They were the first line of defense for the royal family. Around midday, Marcus was supposed to take his break. There was a small room near the guard quarters where sentinels could rest for 30 minutes, eat a quick meal, and prepare for the next shift. But as he began to step away from his post, he heard loud voices coming from behind the eastern wall. The sound made him pause. It was not normal palace noise. There was aggression in those voices, the kind that signaled trouble. Marcus quickly moved toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to the baton at his side. As he rounded the corner, he saw a group of the new recruits gathered in a circle. They were laughing and jeering, and in the center of their circle was a figure on the ground. Marcus's stomach tightened. This was hazing, the kind of cruel initiation that had no place in the palace guard. He approached quickly, his voice firm and commanding. The recruits turned to look at him, and for a moment their laughter died down. Marcus recognized the young man on the ground. His name was Thomas, a quiet recruit who had arrived with the latest group. He was smaller than the others, and Marcus had noticed he kept to himself during training exercises. The leader of the recruit group, a tall young man named Derek, stepped forward with a smirk on his face. He crossed his arms and looked Marcus up and down as if measuring him. Derek came from a wealthy family, and there were rumors that his father had paid handsomely to secure his position in the palace guard. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed rules did not apply to him. Marcus told them to disperse immediately and help Thomas to his feet. But Derek did not move. Instead, he laughed and made a comment about Marcus being too serious, about how they were just having some fun. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably, caught between following Derek's lead and obeying a superior officer's command. This was a test, Marcus realized. Derek was challenging his authority in front of the other recruits. If Marcus backed down now, he would lose their respect forever. But if he pushed too hard, Derek might use his family connections to cause problems. Palace politics were complicated, and Marcus had learned that sometimes the rules protected the wrong people. He repeated his command, this time with more force in his voice. He explained that hazing was strictly forbidden, and that any recruit caught engaging in such behavior would be immediately dismissed from service. This was not an empty threat. The palace had clear rules about the treatment of fellow guards, and Marcus intended to enforce them. Derek's expression darkened. He took a step closer to Marcus, invading his personal space in a clear act of intimidation. The other recruits watched silently, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Thomas had managed to get to his feet and was standing at the edge of the circle, his face bruised and his uniform dirty. What happened next would change everything. Derek suddenly reached out and shoved Marcus backward. It was not a hard shove, but it was deliberate and disrespectful. In the military hierarchy of the palace guard, physically confronting a superior officer was grounds for immediate dismissal. But Derek seemed to think he was untouchable. Marcus's training kicked in. He quickly grabbed Derek's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced the recruit to his knees. The other recruits gasped and stepped back. For a moment, everything was silent except for Derek's angry breathing. Marcus held him firmly but did not hurt him. He was demonstrating control, showing that authority in the palace guard was earned through skill and discipline, not family connections. But Derek was not finished. As soon as Marcus released him, the recruit scrambled to his feet and launched himself at the Sentinel. The two men crashed to the ground, and suddenly the other recruits were joining in. It was chaos. Marcus found himself fighting off multiple attackers, his years of training helping him defend himself, but the numbers were against him. He managed to throw off two of them and landed a solid punch that sent another recruit sprawling. But there were too many. They overwhelmed him through sheer numbers, pinning him to the ground. Derek stood over him, breathing hard, a wild look in his eyes. The young recruit seemed to realize he had crossed a line he could not uncross, but instead of stopping, he doubled down. Marcus struggled against the hands holding him down, but it was useless. His mind raced, trying to figure out how this situation had spiraled so badly out of control. He had only been trying to protect a weaker recruit from bullying. He had only been doing his job. Derek ordered the other recruits to drag Marcus toward an old storage building at the far edge of the palace grounds. The structure was rarely used anymore, filled with broken furniture and outdated equipment that nobody had bothered to throw away. It was the perfect place to hide someone, at least temporarily. Marcus tried to reason with them as they pulled him along, explaining that this would only make things worse for everyone involved. But fear had taken over the recruits' minds now. They had assaulted a superior officer, and they knew the punishment would be severe. The storage building was dark and musty inside. Dust particles floated in the thin streams of light that came through cracks in the wooden walls. The recruits threw Marcus into a corner and used rope they found among the stored items to tie his hands behind his back. Derek stood over him, his earlier confidence now mixed with visible panic. He was clearly trying to figure out what to do next. Marcus kept his voice calm as he spoke. He told Derek that it was not too late to fix this situation. If they untied him now and went to confess what had happened to the captain of the guard, they might receive punishment, but it would not destroy their futures. But if they left him here, if they tried to cover this up, the consequences would be far worse. Derek seemed to consider this for a moment, but then one of the other recruits reminded him about his father's influence. Maybe they could make this go away. Maybe they could claim Marcus had attacked them first. This was the problem with corruption in powerful places. When people believed their connections could save them from consequences, they made increasingly bad decisions. Derek convinced himself that his family's money and status would protect him. He told the others to stay quiet about what had happened. They would claim they had not seen Marcus all day. By the time anyone found him, they would have their story straight. The recruits left, locking the heavy wooden door behind them. Marcus heard their footsteps fade away, and then there was silence. He sat in the darkness, his mind working through his options. The rope was tight, cutting into his wrists. The building was solid despite its age, and the door was reinforced with iron brackets. Even if he could get his hands free, breaking out would not be easy. Hours passed slowly. Marcus could tell by the changing quality of light through the cracks that afternoon was turning into evening. His absence from his post would have been noticed by now. The palace guard operated on strict schedules, and when a sentinel did not show up for their shift, it raised immediate concerns. The captain would have initiated a search, but the palace grounds were vast. This old storage building was in a section that most people had forgotten about. Marcus thought about his parents back in the village. They would be devastated if something happened to him. His mother had worried so much when he first joined the palace guard. She had heard stories about the dangers, about guards who had been injured or worse while protecting the royal family. Marcus had always reassured her that he would be careful, that he would come home to visit. Now he wondered if he had been too confident in his own abilities to handle any situation. As darkness fell completely, Marcus heard a sound outside the building. His heart jumped with hope. Maybe the search party had found him, but the footsteps were too light, too cautious. Then he heard whispered voices. The recruits had returned, probably to check on him or possibly to move him somewhere else. The door creaked open and Derek stepped inside carrying a lamp. The flickering light cast strange shadows on the walls. Derek looked different now. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by genuine fear. He knelt down in front of Marcus and spoke in a low, urgent voice. He said that things had gotten complicated. The captain of the guard had assembled the entire staff to search for Marcus. They were questioning everyone, going through every building. It was only a matter of time before they checked this old storage area. Derek had come to a decision. He was going to let Marcus go, but he wanted assurances. He wanted Marcus to say that this had all been a misunderstanding, that the recruits had done nothing wrong. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of this request. Did Derek really think he could assault a superior officer, tie him up and leave him in an abandoned building, and then everything would just be forgiven? Marcus refused flatly. He told Derek that he would tell the truth about what had happened, and that Derek and the others would face the consequences of their actions. Justice was not negotiable. Derek's face hardened again. He stood up and paced back and forth, the lamp swinging in his hand and making the shadows dance wildly. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he let Marcus go, the truth would come out. If he kept Marcus here, eventually someone would find them. There was no good option for him anymore. This was the price of his poor decisions, the inevitable result of thinking he was above the rules. Then Derek said something that chilled Marcus to the bone. He suggested that maybe Marcus could have an accident. The palace grounds were large, and accidents happened sometimes. A guard could fall from a wall during patrol, or get injured during training. These things were tragic, but not unheard of. The other recruits who had followed Derek into the building looked horrified at this suggestion. They had been willing to rough up a fellow guard and hide him temporarily, but this was different. This was talking about permanent harm. One of the recruits, a young man named Peter, spoke up. He said this had gone far enough. He had only joined in with the hazing because he wanted to fit in with the group, but he had not signed up for anything like this. Peter moved toward Marcus, saying he was going to untie him, and they would all go face the captain together. It was the right thing to do, even if it meant the end of their careers in the palace guard. Derek grabbed Peter's arm and pulled him back roughly. There was genuine danger in Derek's eyes now. He had crossed so many lines that one more did not seem to matter anymore. This was how ordinary people became capable of terrible things. They made one bad choice, then another, until they were so far down a dark path that the way back seemed impossible. Marcus watched this unfold with growing concern. He had been in dangerous situations before, had faced potential threats to the royal family during his years as a Sentinel, but this felt different. This danger came from within, from people who were supposed to be on the same side. It was a betrayal of everything the palace guard stood for. Outside they heard voices calling Marcus's name. The search party was getting closer. Derek's head snapped toward the door, his eyes wide. He made a decision in that moment, grabbing the lamp and rushing toward the door. He told the other recruits to follow him, that they needed to get away from this building before they were discovered here. But Peter refused to move. He positioned himself between Derek and Marcus, his jaw set with determination. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. Finally, Derek cursed and ran out of the building, several of the other recruits following him. Peter immediately knelt down and began working on the ropes binding Marcus's wrists. His hands were shaking, making the task difficult, but he kept working at the knots. Marcus could hear the search party getting closer. Voices were calling out, coordinating their search pattern. They would be at this building any minute now. Peter's fingers finally managed to loosen the knots enough for Marcus to pull his hands free. The rope had cut into his wrists, leaving angry red marks, but Marcus barely noticed. He got to his feet quickly, his muscles stiff from hours of being bound. Peter looked at him with a mixture of guilt and relief, apologizing repeatedly for his part in what had happened. Marcus put a hand on the young recruit's shoulder and told him that stepping forward to do the right thing took courage. That counted for something. They heard footsteps right outside the building now. The door burst open and the captain of the guard stood there with several other sentinels behind him. Captain William was a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and a scarred face that spoke of years of service. His eyes swept the scene quickly, taking in Marcus's disheveled appearance and the rope on the ground. His expression darkened with understanding. The captain immediately called for the palace physician to examine Marcus. then turned his attention to Peter. In a voice that allowed no argument, he demanded to know exactly what had happened. Peter, to his credit, told the truth. He explained about the hazing of Thomas, about Marcus intervening, about Derek's attack and the decision to trap Marcus in the storage building. He named every recruit who had been involved, not trying to minimize his own participation or shift blame. Captain William listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When Peter finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then the captain gave orders in rapid succession. Guards were dispatched to apprehend all the recruits Peter had named. The palace was to be locked down immediately. No one was to leave the grounds until this situation was resolved. He also sent word to the royal family, informing them of a serious disciplinary matter among the guard. Marcus was escorted to the medical wing, where the physician cleaned his wounds and checked him for any serious injuries. Aside from bruises and the cuts on his wrists, he was physically fine. But the physician, a kind older man named Dr. Harrison, looked at him with concern and asked how he was feeling mentally. Betrayal by fellow guards was not a physical wound, but it could cut just as deep. Marcus appreciated the concern but said he would be fine. He just wanted to give his full report and then rest. The captain came to see him in the medical wing an hour later. Marcus provided a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the moment he heard the commotion behind the eastern wall to when Peter freed him from the ropes. The captain took notes, asking clarifying questions at several points. When Marcus finished, Captain William set down his pen and looked at him seriously. The captain explained that this situation was more complicated than a simple disciplinary matter. Derek's father was Lord Hamilton, one of the king's advisors and a man with considerable influence at court. Lord Hamilton had already sent word demanding to speak with the captain immediately, no doubt preparing to defend his son. The captain made it clear that he had no intention of letting Derek escape justice, but Marcus should be prepared for political pressure and attempts to discredit his version of events. This was exactly what Marcus had feared. He had been doing his job, protecting a recruit from abuse, and now he would probably be pulled into palace politics. He asked the captain directly if his word would be enough, or if the influence of wealthy families would override the truth. Captain William's answer was honest. He said that normally the word of a Sentinel with Marcus's record would be unquestionable. But when powerful families were involved, things became unpredictable. The captain would fight for Marcus, but he could not guarantee the outcome. That night Marcus lay in his quarters unable to sleep. His wrists throbbed despite the bandages, but that was not what kept him awake. He kept replaying the events in his mind, wondering if he could have handled things differently. Maybe if he had been more diplomatic with Derek, if he had found a way to diffuse the situation without confrontation, none of this would have happened. But even as he thought this, he knew it was not true. Derek had been determined to assert his dominance, and someone like that would have found a reason to create conflict eventually. The next morning, Marcus was summoned to the captain's office. When he arrived, he found not just Captain William but also Lord Hamilton. The nobleman was a tall man with silver hair and expensive clothes. He looked at Marcus with cold eyes, as if the Sentinel was something unpleasant he had found on the bottom of his shoe. The captain introduced Marcus and gestured for him to sit, but Lord Hamilton immediately began speaking. Lord Hamilton declared that this entire situation was a tragic misunderstanding. His son had explained everything. The recruits were engaged in traditional training exercises when Marcus had overreacted and became violent. Derek and the others had been forced to defend themselves. When Marcus threatened them further, they had temporarily restrained him for everyone's safety. They had planned to come forward and explain, but the situation had escalated before they could do so. Marcus sat in stunned silence as Lord Hamilton spun this complete fabrication. Every word was a lie, carefully constructed to paint Derek as the victim and Marcus as an unstable guard who had attacked recruits without cause. The nobleman had clearly coached his son on this story, and probably the other recruits as well. It was Marcus's word against theirs, and Lord Hamilton was betting that his influence would tip the scales. Captain William's face was like stone as he listened. When Lord Hamilton finished, the captain turned to Marcus and asked for his response. Marcus repeated the truth, his voice steady despite his anger. He described the hazing, the assault, being tied up and trapped. He pointed out that Peter had confirmed his version of events. But Lord Hamilton dismissed Peter's testimony, claiming the recruit had been intimidated by Marcus and was afraid to tell the truth. This went on for over an hour, with Lord Hamilton growing increasingly aggressive in his defense of Derek. He suggested that Marcus had a personal vendetta against his son, that perhaps Marcus was jealous of recruits from wealthy families. He even hinted that Marcus might be trying to create a scandal to gain attention or advance his own career. The accusations were absurd, but they were said with such confidence that they planted seeds of doubt. Finally, Captain William raised his hand for silence. He told Lord Hamilton that he would conduct a thorough investigation before making any decisions. Every recruit would be questioned separately, and their stories would be compared for inconsistencies. The truth would come out regardless of anyone's family connections or social status. Lord Hamilton did not like this answer, but he had no choice except to agree. He left with a warning that he would be watching this investigation very closely. After the nobleman departed, Captain William turned to Marcus with an expression of frustration and sympathy. He apologized for the situation and assured Marcus that he believed his account. But the captain was realistic about the challenges they faced. Lord Hamilton would use every resource at his disposal to protect his son. He would pressure other nobles, call in favors, and possibly even appeal to the king directly. The investigation needed to be absolutely thorough and beyond reproach, or Marcus would be the one who suffered. Marcus spent the next several days in a strange limbo. He was not allowed to return to his regular duties while the investigation was ongoing, so he remained in his quarters or walked the parts of the palace grounds where he would not encounter the recruits. Other guards would nod to him in the corridors, and a few stopped to quietly express their support. Word had spread about what happened, and most of the guards stood with Marcus. But there were some who seemed uncertain, influenced by the rumors that Lord Hamilton was spreading. The captain questioned each recruit individually, just as he had promised. Some of them stuck to Derek's false story, clearly afraid of Lord Hamilton's power, but others began to crack under questioning, especially when the captain pointed out the consequences of lying during an official investigation. Peter's testimony remained consistent, and a few other recruits admitted they had seen Derek shove Marcus first, contradicting the claim that Marcus had been the aggressor. On the 5th day of the investigation, something unexpected happened. Thomas, the young recruit who had originally been hazed, requested to speak with the captain. He had been recovering from his own injuries and had been keeping quiet, probably afraid of retaliation. But he came forward now with his own testimony. Thomas stood in the captain's office, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Despite his obvious fear, his voice was clear as he described the hazing he had endured and how Marcus had been the only one brave enough to step in and help him. He explained that Derek had been the ringleader, encouraging the other recruits to prove their toughness by targeting the weakest member of their group. Thomas had witnessed everything that followed, including Derek shoving Marcus first and then ordering the others to attack. Captain William asked Thomas why he had waited so long to come forward. The young recruit's answer was honest and heartbreaking. He said he had been terrified of Derek and the others, afraid they would hurt him worse if he spoke up. He was new to the palace, had no family connections or friends to protect him, but as the days passed and he heard the rumors about Marcus being blamed for the incident, Thomas knew he could not stay silent anymore. Marcus had defended him when no one else would. The least Thomas could do was tell the truth now, regardless of the personal cost. This testimony was crucial. Thomas had no reason to lie, and unlike some of the other recruits, he was not involved in the assault on Marcus. His account corroborated every detail of Marcus's story, and directly contradicted the false narrative that Lord Hamilton had constructed. The captain thanked Thomas for his courage and assured him that he would be protected from any retaliation. With this new evidence, Captain William felt confident enough to present his findings to the palace administration. He prepared a comprehensive report documenting the entire incident, including statements from multiple witnesses, physical evidence from the storage building, and medical records showing Marcus's injuries. The report concluded that Derek and several other recruits had violated multiple regulations, including assault of a superior officer, false imprisonment, and lying during an official investigation. The captain recommended immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges. But Lord Hamilton was not finished fighting. When he learned about Thomas's testimony, he sent lawyers to question the young recruit, trying to find inconsistencies in his story or reasons to doubt his credibility. They questioned why Thomas had not reported the hazing immediately, suggesting that perhaps he had fabricated the entire story out of resentment. They even had a physician examine him, claiming his injuries were not severe enough to justify the accusations. Marcus watched all of this unfold with growing frustration. The truth should have been simple and clear, but Lord Hamilton was using his wealth and influence to muddy the waters. He was not trying to prove his son was innocent. He was just creating enough doubt and confusion that the palace administration might decide to quietly sweep the whole matter under the rug to avoid embarrassment. Then something happened that no one expected. Prince George requested a meeting with Captain William. The young prince had been away from the palace during the initial incident, traveling with his tutors to visit other parts of the kingdom. But he had returned to find the palace in turmoil over this investigation, and he wanted to understand what had happened. The captain was surprised by the prince's interest. While Prince George was known for being kind to the staff, he usually did not involve himself in disciplinary matters among the guards. That was considered the responsibility of the captain and the palace administrators. But the prince insisted, saying that this matter involved questions of justice and honor, which concerned him deeply. Captain William provided Prince George with a complete briefing, holding nothing back. He explained the hazing incident, Marcus's intervention, the assault and imprisonment, and Lord Hamilton's attempts to protect his son from consequences. He showed the prince the investigation report with all its evidence and witness statements. Prince George listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions at several points. When the captain finished, Prince George sat quietly for a moment, considering everything he had heard. Then he said something that would change the course of events. He stated that if the evidence was as clear as it appeared, then Lord Hamilton's status should not matter. The Palace Guard was supposed to be an institution built on merit and honor, not family connections. If they allowed wealth and influence to override justice, then the entire guard would lose the respect of the people they were meant to protect. The prince requested to speak with Marcus personally. Captain William was surprised but agreed immediately. He sent for Marcus, who arrived at the captain's office confused and nervous. Meeting with a member of the royal family was not something ordinary guards did, especially not during a scandal. Marcus wondered if this was good news or bad. When Marcus entered, Prince George stood and offered his hand in greeting, a gesture of respect that shocked Marcus. Royalty did not shake hands with guards, but Prince George seemed unconcerned with protocol. He invited Marcus to sit and then said he wanted to hear the story directly from him. Marcus told his account once more, his voice steady despite his nervousness. He explained about intervening to stop the hazing, about Derek's attack, about being trapped in the storage building. He did not exaggerate or add drama. He simply told the truth. Prince George listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. When the story was finished, the prince asked a question that Marcus had not expected. He asked why Marcus had chosen to intervene when he saw Thomas being hazed. Marcus could have walked away, could have reported it through official channels without putting himself in danger. Why had he felt compelled to step in personally? Marcus thought about this for a moment before answering. He said that when he had first joined the Palace Guard, he had been nervous and uncertain, just like Thomas. He remembered how isolated he had felt, how desperately he had wanted to belong. If someone had been targeting him back then, if other guards had stood by and watched without helping, it would have broken something inside him. He could not do that to someone else. The Palace Guard was supposed to be a brotherhood, and brothers protected each other. This answer seemed to resonate with Prince George. He nodded slowly and said that Marcus had demonstrated the exact qualities that should define a Palace Guard: courage, honor, and compassion. These were not just words to put in recruitment notices. They were principles that should guide every action. The prince then made a statement that surprised everyone in the room. Prince George declared that he would personally ensure this investigation reached a just conclusion. Lord Hamilton's influence would not be allowed to corrupt the process. Derek and the other recruits who had participated in the assault would face appropriate consequences. Furthermore, the prince wanted to review the entire recruitment and training process for new guards to ensure that people with Derek's character and sense of entitlement did not make it through in the future. Captain William looked relieved but also concerned. He pointed out that Lord Hamilton was an advisor to the king, and Prince George's involvement might create political complications. But the prince was unmoved. He said that his father, the king, valued justice and would support doing the right thing, and if Lord Hamilton had a problem with that, he could bring his concerns directly to the royal family. Word of Prince George's involvement spread quickly through the palace. The atmosphere changed overnight. Guards who had been uncertain about the situation now spoke openly in support of Marcus. Even some of the palace administrators who had been hesitant to challenge Lord Hamilton's influence began to show more backbone. The prince's clear stance had shifted the political dynamics. Lord Hamilton requested an audience with Prince George, no doubt hoping to use his persuasive skills and political connections to change the prince's mind. But Prince George refused the meeting, sending word that the investigation was complete and the evidence was clear. There was nothing to discuss. Derek would be dismissed from the palace guard, along with the other recruits who had participated in the assault. Peter, who had helped free Marcus, would face suspension and additional training, but would be given a second chance because of his ultimate choice to do the right thing. The decision was final and came from the prince himself, which meant there was no higher authority Lord Hamilton could appeal to except the king. And the king, when informed of the situation by his son, supported the decision completely. Justice had prevailed, though it had taken longer and been more complicated than it should have been. Derek was escorted from the palace grounds 3 days later, his uniform stripped away and his future in the royal guard ended forever. The other recruits who had participated in the assault faced similar fates. Some of them looked genuinely remorseful as they departed, understanding too late that their poor choices had cost them everything. Derek, however, left with the same arrogance he had displayed throughout, apparently convinced that his father would eventually fix everything. He was wrong. Even Lord Hamilton's considerable influence could not overturn a decision personally endorsed by Prince George and the king. Marcus returned to his duties as a palace sentinel, standing at his post by the grand entrance with the same discipline and pride as before. But something had changed. Other guards treated him with a new level of respect. They had watched him face down powerful opposition and refused to compromise the truth, even when it would have been easier to accept whatever settlement Lord Hamilton offered. Marcus had become a symbol of what the palace guard should be. Thomas also remained with the guard, and under Peter's mentorship, he began to grow stronger and more confident. The hazing incident had been traumatic, but it had not broken him. Instead, it had revealed his own courage in coming forward to tell the truth. The other recruits accepted him now not as a weak target, but as someone who had proven himself when it mattered most. A week after Derek's dismissal, Marcus received an unexpected summons to the prince's private study. This was unusual enough that Marcus wondered if something was wrong. Had there been some new development in the case? Was Lord Hamilton still causing problems behind the scenes? Marcus arrived at the appointed time, and a palace attendant showed him into the study. The room was smaller and more intimate than Marcus expected. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a large window overlooked the palace gardens. Prince George was sitting at a desk reviewing some documents, but he stood immediately when Marcus entered. The prince dismissed the attendant, leaving just the two of them in the room. Prince George began by thanking Marcus again for his service and for his integrity throughout the investigation. But then the prince said he had been thinking about something. The incident with Derek had revealed a problem with the palace guard that went beyond just one bad recruit. The system had allowed someone like Derek to get through the recruitment process in the first place. His family connections had opened doors that his character did not merit. The prince explained that he wanted to reform how the palace guard operated. He wanted to ensure that positions were earned through genuine merit, not purchased through family influence. He wanted a guard that truly represented the best qualities of the kingdom: courage, honor, loyalty, and compassion. But to accomplish this, he needed people in leadership positions who embodied those values. People like Marcus. Marcus listened, not sure where this was going. He was just a sentinel, one of many guards who stood watch over the palace. He had no special training in leadership or administration. But Prince George had something specific in mind. The prince said he was creating a new position within the guard, a personal guard assigned directly to him. This guard would not just stand outside doors or patrol corridors. This person would be the prince's constant companion, advisor on security matters, and a symbol of the reformed values the prince wanted to instill in the entire guard. Prince George wanted Marcus to be his personal guard. The offer was unexpected and overwhelming. Marcus tried to protest, saying there were surely more qualified guards, people who had been serving longer or had more impressive combat records. But the prince waved away these objections. Technical skills could be learned, but character could not be taught. Marcus had demonstrated the exact qualities the prince valued most. The choice was clear. Marcus asked for time to think about it. The position would mean leaving his post at the main entrance, changing his entire role within the guard structure. It would also mean being in the public eye much more, as the prince's personal guard would be visible whenever the prince appeared at official functions. There would be increased scrutiny and probably resentment from some guards who might feel Marcus had been elevated above his station. Prince George granted him until the next day to decide, but added one more thing. He said that Marcus should not think of this as a reward for what had happened with Derek. That incident had simply revealed to the prince what kind of person Marcus was. This offer was about the future, about building the kind of palace guard that could serve the kingdom with true honor. That evening, Marcus walked through the palace grounds as the sun set, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and pink. He found himself at the spot where he used to stand guard, looking at the grand entrance he had protected for 3 years. Another guard stood there now, a good man named Robert, who Marcus had trained himself. Robert nodded respectfully as Marcus passed, and Marcus returned the gesture. Marcus thought about his parents back in the village. They had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities they never had. His father had worked long hours at the forge, his hands scarred from years of handling hot metal. His mother had sewn clothes by candlelight late into the night to earn extra money. They had both been so proud when Marcus became a palace sentinel. How would they react when they learned their son had been chosen as the prince's personal guard? The thought made Marcus smile despite his nervousness about the decision. He also thought about the responsibility that would come with this new position. Being the prince's personal guard meant more than just standing nearby and looking alert. It meant being ready to put his life between the prince and any danger. It meant being constantly aware of threats, both obvious and subtle. It meant earning the trust not just of Prince George, but of the entire royal family. The weight of that responsibility was immense. But Marcus also understood what the prince was really offering. This was not just about him personally. It was about sending a message to the entire palace guard and to the kingdom beyond. It was about showing that merit mattered more than money, that character was more valuable than connections. If Marcus accepted this position, he would become a symbol of those values. Every time someone saw him standing beside the prince, they would be reminded that the palace guard was changing, becoming what it should have always been. Marcus made his decision before the sun had fully set. He would accept Prince George's offer. Yes, it was daunting. Yes, there would be challenges and probably people who resented his elevation. But Marcus had not joined the palace guard to have an easy life. He had joined to serve something greater than himself, to protect those who needed protection, to stand for what was right even when it was difficult. This new position would allow him to do all of that on a larger scale. The next morning, Marcus returned to the prince's study and formally accepted the position. Prince George looked genuinely pleased, shaking Marcus's hand firmly and saying he had hoped that would be the answer. The prince explained that there would be additional training, of course. Marcus would need to learn about the specific protocols surrounding the royal family, understand the political landscape of the court, and develop skills beyond basic guard duties. But the prince had confidence that Marcus would excel. Captain William was informed of the decision, and while he was sorry to lose one of his best sentinels from the regular ranks, he understood the importance of what the prince was trying to accomplish. The captain told Marcus that he had earned this opportunity, and that the entire guard would be watching him with pride. He also offered some advice. Stay humble, stay focused on the mission, and never forget where you came from. The announcement was made to the full palace guard at morning assembly. Prince George himself attended, standing beside Captain William as the decision was explained. There was a moment of surprised silence, and then applause began to spread through the ranks. Most of the guards understood what this meant and supported it wholeheartedly. A few looked skeptical or envious, but they kept those feelings to themselves. Thomas approached Marcus after the assembly, his face beaming with gratitude. He said that seeing Marcus elevated to the prince's personal guard gave him hope that hard work and good character really did matter. If Marcus could rise from a village blacksmith's son to standing beside the prince, then Thomas could overcome his rough beginning as well. Marcus encouraged him to keep training hard and always do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Peter also congratulated Marcus, though his words carried a note of regret. He knew his own career in the Guard had been permanently affected by his participation in the assault, even though he had ultimately done the right thing. Marcus told him that mistakes did not define a person. What mattered was learning from them and becoming better. Peter still had a future in the Guard if he worked for it. The transformation in Marcus's daily life began immediately. He was fitted for a new uniform, distinct from the regular Sentinels but still clearly part of the Guard. The tailors worked quickly, and within 2 days, Marcus stood in his new attire, looking at himself in a mirror and barely recognizing the figure staring back. He looked like someone important, someone with authority and responsibility. It was both exciting and slightly terrifying. His training intensified under the direct supervision of Captain William and several senior guards who specialized in royal protection. They taught him how to scan crowds for potential threats, how to position himself to best protect the prince in various situations, and how to coordinate with other guards during public appearances. They also educated him on court politics, helping him understand the complex web of relationships and rivalries that existed among the nobility. Marcus learned that being the prince's personal guard meant being constantly alert, but also invisible when appropriate. During private moments, he needed to give the prince space while still being ready to respond instantly to any danger. During public appearances, he needed to project strength and competence without drawing attention away from the prince. It was a delicate balance that required both physical skill and emotional intelligence. After 2 weeks of intensive preparation, Marcus officially began his duties as Prince George's personal guard. His first day was nerve-wracking. He stood beside the prince during a meeting with foreign ambassadors, acutely aware that any mistake he made would reflect poorly, not just on himself, but on the prince who had chosen him. But the day passed without incident, and Prince George thanked him afterward, saying he had done well. As weeks turned into months, Marcus settled into his new role with growing confidence. He accompanied Prince George everywhere, to council meetings where important decisions about the kingdom were made, to public ceremonies where the prince greeted citizens, to private dinners with visiting dignitaries, and even to the prince's morning rides through the countryside. Each situation brought different challenges and required different skills, but Marcus adapted quickly. The relationship between Marcus and Prince George evolved beyond the simple dynamic of guard and royal. They began to talk during the quieter moments, discussing everything from security concerns to philosophy to the challenges of living up to expectations. Prince George confided that he felt enormous pressure to prove himself worthy of eventual kingship, to show that he could lead with both strength and compassion. Marcus understood that pressure, having felt similar weight on his own shoulders as the first guard elevated purely on merit rather than family connections. There were difficult moments, of course. Some nobles still loyal to Lord Hamilton made subtle attempts to undermine Marcus, spreading rumors that he was unsuited for such an important position, or that the prince had made an emotional decision rather than a practical one. Marcus heard these whispers but refused to let them affect his work. He let his actions speak for themselves, maintaining the same professionalism and dedication that had defined his entire career. One particularly challenging incident occurred during a royal banquet, attended by nobles from across the kingdom. Marcus stood behind Prince George's chair as always, alert but attempting to blend into the background. Lord Hamilton was in attendance, seated near the king, and throughout the evening Marcus could feel the nobleman's hostile gaze. It was clear that Lord Hamilton blamed Marcus for Derek's dismissal and the damage to his family's reputation. During the banquet, a minor disturbance occurred when one of the servants accidentally dropped a tray of glasses. The sound of shattering crystal caused several guards to reach for their weapons instinctively. Marcus moved quickly but calmly, positioning himself between the prince and the source of the noise while simultaneously assessing that there was no actual threat. His response was measured and professional, unlike a few other guards who overreacted to the innocent accident. Prince George noticed the difference and later commended Marcus for his judgment. The prince explained that this was exactly why he had wanted Marcus in this position. Anyone could learn to be physically strong or quick with a weapon, but knowing when not to act was just as important as knowing when to act. It required wisdom and confidence that came from genuine character rather than just training. Marcus also began to play an unexpected role as an informal advisor to the prince on matters involving the common people. Prince George recognized that his own upbringing had been sheltered, surrounded by wealth and privilege. He wanted to understand the concerns and perspectives of ordinary citizens, and Marcus provided a valuable window into that world. Marcus shared stories about life in his village, about the struggles his parents faced, about the hopes and fears of working people who would never attend royal banquets or live in palaces. These conversations influenced some of Prince George's decisions. When the royal council was debating a new tax proposal, the prince argued against it after Marcus explained how such taxes fell disproportionately on people who were already struggling. When there was discussion about cutting funding for village schools, the prince defended the importance of education for all children, not just those from wealthy families. Marcus never asked for this advisory role, but it emerged naturally from their growing mutual respect. The other guards watched Marcus's success with a mixture of pride and motivation. Captain William reported that applications to join the palace guard had increased significantly, with many applicants specifically mentioning that they were inspired by Marcus's story. The guard was attracting a better quality of recruit now, young men and women who wanted to serve with honor rather than just seeking a prestigious position. This was exactly the change Prince George had hoped to inspire. Thomas thrived under this new environment. He worked hard in his training, no longer the target of bullying, but instead a respected member of the guard community. He still struggled with confidence sometimes, but Peter and other guards supported him. Thomas often thanked Marcus for intervening that day behind the eastern wall, saying it had literally changed his life. Marcus always responded that Thomas had saved himself by having the courage to tell the truth. Bravery came in many forms. 6 months into his service as the prince's personal guard, Marcus was granted leave to visit his parents. He had written to them regularly, but this would be the first time he had returned home since accepting the new position. The journey to his village took most of a day, and as Marcus rode through familiar streets, he noticed people staring at his uniform. Word had spread about the local boy who had become the prince's guard. His parents' reaction was everything Marcus hoped it would be. His mother wept with joy and pride, hugging him tightly and refusing to let go. His father shook his hand firmly, his scarred blacksmith's hand strong despite his age, and simply said he was proud. That single statement meant more to Marcus than all the praise and recognition he had received at the palace. The village organized a small celebration in Marcus's honor that evening. Neighbors and old friends gathered to congratulate him and hear stories about life at the palace. Marcus kept his descriptions modest, not wanting to seem like he was showing off. But the villagers were hungry for details, asking about the royal family, the grand rooms, the important visitors from foreign lands. Marcus answered their questions patiently, remembering how he had once been just as curious about the world beyond the village. One elderly man, the village teacher who had first taught Marcus to read and write, pulled him aside during the celebration. The teacher said he had always known Marcus would do something meaningful with his life because he combined intelligence with genuine kindness. That combination was rare and valuable. The teacher encouraged Marcus to never lose touch with his roots, to always remember where he came from even as he served in the highest circles of the kingdom. Marcus took those words to heart. When he returned to the palace 3 days later, he came back with a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just Marcus the palace guard. He was Marcus from the village, son of a blacksmith and a seamstress, representative of all the common people who rarely had voices in the halls of power. That identity was not something to hide or forget. It was his greatest strength. As his first year in the position approached, Prince George invited Marcus to a private conversation in the palace gardens. They walked among the flowering plants as the prince reflected on how much had changed. The recruitment process for the palace guard had been reformed, with new emphasis on character evaluation, rather than just family connections. Several guards from common backgrounds had been promoted to leadership positions based on merit. The entire culture of the guard was shifting in positive ways. Prince George credited Marcus with being the catalyst for these changes, but Marcus disagreed. He said the prince deserved the credit for having the vision and courage to challenge the old way of doing things. Marcus had simply been given an opportunity. and he had tried to make the most of it. The prince smiled at this and said that was exactly the kind of humility that made Marcus the right person for the role. Then Prince George revealed something that surprised Marcus. The king had been watching Marcus's service closely over the past year, and His Majesty was impressed. The king wanted to expand the reforms that had begun with the palace guard to other parts of the royal service. He wanted stewards, advisors, and officials chosen based on capability rather than bloodline. The transformation that started with one guard, standing up against injustice, was beginning to ripple outward through the entire structure of the kingdom. Marcus listened with amazement as the prince described these plans. It seemed impossible that his simple act of defending Thomas from bullying could have led to such far-reaching changes. But Prince George explained that meaningful change often started small. One person refusing to accept corruption, one person standing up for what was right, one person proving that a different way was possible. Those individual acts could inspire others and eventually transform entire systems. The prince also warned Marcus that not everyone was happy with these changes. There were nobles who benefited from the old system, where family connections guaranteed positions and power. Lord Hamilton remained bitter about his son's dismissal and was quietly working to oppose the reforms. Other wealthy families who had planned to secure positions for their children through influence rather than merit were also unhappy. Marcus should expect continued resistance and possibly even direct attempts to discredit him or the principles he represented. Marcus acknowledged the warning but was not deterred. He had faced Lord Hamilton's opposition before and survived. He understood now that this was bigger than just his personal career or even the palace guard. This was about what kind of kingdom they wanted to build for the future. Did they want a system where a talented child from a poor family had no chance to rise, while incompetent nobles filled important positions? Or did they want a system where everyone, regardless of birth, could achieve great things through hard work and good character? The answer seemed obvious to Marcus, though he understood it was more complicated for those in power. Change always threatened someone's advantage, and those people would fight to maintain their privileges. But Marcus believed that over time, the benefits of a merit-based system would become undeniable. The kingdom would be stronger, more just, and more prosperous when the best people held important positions rather than simply the best connected people. As they continued walking through the gardens, Prince George mentioned one more thing. There was to be a ceremony in 2 weeks where several guards and other palace staff would receive formal recognition for their service. Marcus would be among those honored, receiving a special commendation from the king himself for exemplary service and embodying the highest ideals of the palace guard. The honor came with a significant increase in salary and the formal title of first guard to the prince. Marcus felt overwhelmed by this recognition. He had never sought honors or titles. He had simply tried to do his job well and make choices he could be proud of. But the prince explained that the ceremony was not really about Marcus personally. It was about showing the entire kingdom what qualities were valued by the royal family. When the king honored Marcus, he was sending a message to every person in the kingdom that character, courage, and merit mattered more than birthright. The 2 weeks before the ceremony passed quickly. Marcus continued his regular duties, accompanying the prince to various functions and maintaining the security that was his primary responsibility, but he also found time to help prepare Thomas and several other guards for upcoming evaluations. Marcus believed strongly in mentorship now, in helping others develop their skills and advance based on their own merits. He remembered how isolated he had felt as a new recruit, and he did not want others to experience that same loneliness. The ceremony took place in the palace's grand hall, a magnificent room with high ceilings and enormous windows that filled the space with natural light. Hundreds of people attended, including nobles, palace staff, and even some common citizens who had been invited to witness the occasion. Marcus stood among the other honorees wearing his dress uniform and trying to control his nervousness. When the king entered, everyone bowed. His Majesty was an imposing figure despite his age, tall and dignified with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Prince George stood beside his father, and Marcus caught the prince's eye briefly. The prince gave a small, encouraging nod. The king spoke about the importance of service and dedication, about how the strength of a kingdom came not from its wealth or armies, but from the character of its people. He explained that the royal family had a responsibility to recognize and elevate those who demonstrated the qualities that made the kingdom great. Then he began calling forward the honorees one by one. When Marcus's name was called, his heart pounded as he walked forward and knelt before the king. His Majesty spoke about Marcus's actions in defending a fellow guard from abuse, about refusing to compromise the truth despite pressure from powerful families, and about exemplifying the qualities of honor and courage that should define the palace guard. The king then declared Marcus to be first guard to Prince George, with all the responsibilities and privileges that title carried. As Marcus stood and stepped back, the applause that filled the grand hall was thunderous. He saw Captain William beaming with pride, saw Thomas and Peter among the guards looking inspired, saw his fellow honorees congratulating him with genuine happiness. But he also saw Lord Hamilton in the crowd, his face carefully neutral but his eyes cold with resentment. The battle for the soul of the palace guard had been won, but the larger struggle would continue. After the ceremony, there was a reception where honorees could mingle with the nobles and officials who attended. Marcus found himself surrounded by people wanting to congratulate him and ask questions about his service. He handled the attention with the same humble grace he brought to everything, deflecting praise and instead talking about the importance of the reforms Prince George was implementing. At one point, a young nobleman approached Marcus. The young man explained that he was the son of a wealthy merchant family, and his father had been planning to purchase him a position in the palace guard. But after learning about Marcus's story and the reforms taking place, the young man had decided to earn his position properly. He was training hard, working to develop real skills rather than relying on his family's money. He thanked Marcus for inspiring him to take a different path. This conversation moved Marcus deeply. This was why all the struggles had been worthwhile. One young man choosing to earn success rather than buy it might seem like a small thing, but multiply that by hundreds or thousands, and you had a transformation of society. This was the legacy Marcus hoped to leave, not as the prince's first guard, but as someone who had shown that another way was possible. As the reception wound down and guests began to depart, Prince George found Marcus and pulled him aside. The prince said he had been watching Marcus throughout the evening and was struck by how naturally he handled the attention and responsibility. Many people would have let such recognition go to their heads, becoming arrogant or entitled. But Marcus remained exactly who he had always been, a good man trying to do the right thing. The prince then shared his vision for the future. He believed that in his lifetime, the kingdom could become a place where every child had opportunity regardless of their birth circumstances. A place where talent and hard work were rewarded, where justice applied equally to everyone, where compassion and honor guided decisions instead of greed and self-interest. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps even idealistic, but it was worth fighting for. Marcus pledged to support that vision in whatever ways he could. As first guard, he would protect the prince with his life, but he would also use his position and his story to advocate for the reforms they both believed in. He would mentor young guards, would speak truth to power when necessary, would never forget where he came from or why these changes mattered so much. That night, as Marcus returned to his quarters, he reflected on the incredible journey of the past year. He had started as a simple sentinel standing watch at the palace entrance. Then came that fateful morning when he heard Thomas being hazed and made the choice to intervene. That choice had led to conflict with Derek, to being trapped and facing false accusations, to Prince George's unexpected interest in his story. And now he stood here as first guard to the prince, honored by the king himself, part of a movement to transform the kingdom. Marcus thought about his father working at the forge and his mother sewing by candlelight. Their sacrifices had given him this opportunity, and he was determined to honor them by using his position to help others. He thought about Thomas, who had found his courage and was building a good career in the guard. He thought about Peter, who was working to overcome his mistakes and become a better person. He thought about all the young people in villages throughout the kingdom who now believed they could achieve great things through hard work and good character. The reforms would face continued opposition. There would be setbacks and challenges, but Marcus believed the fundamental direction was right. Slowly but surely, the kingdom was becoming fairer and more just. That was worth every difficulty he had endured. As Marcus finally laid down to sleep, he smiled, thinking about how his life had changed. A year ago, he could never have imagined standing in the grand hall receiving recognition from the king. But he had learned something important. Extraordinary outcomes often came from ordinary people making good choices in difficult moments. He had simply chosen to defend someone who needed help. Everything else had followed from that single decision. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling grateful for the opportunity to serve and hopeful for the future. Tomorrow he would wake early, put on his uniform, and take his place beside Prince George. He would continue doing his job with the same dedication and honor that had always defined him. And perhaps in some small way, he would continue helping to build the kind of kingdom where everyone had a chance to succeed, based on their own merit and character. That was the real story, not about one guard's rise to prominence, but about a kingdom slowly learning to value what truly mattered.